back to Danny Castro Conversations. So excited. Danny's back again the second week, and it looks like we'll be doing this every week. So join us, hopefully every Wednesday at this same time, and share it with your friends if you like. Welcome, Danny. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is anyone on that we can see, or?
How about if anybody is on YouTube, why don't you leave a comment and say hi to Danny? If you have any questions, you can do that too. There's a chat that I can check, so I'll see if anybody says hello.
I can't, or should I hit one of these?
What's going on?
Well, we just seem to be discussing something then. And if folk come in, they can jump in to the
I
conversation.
have my friend Henry is watching. He just said hi, Kai and Danny.
Hi, how are you?
Nice.
So we were talking about the capacity of seeing the movie of oneself, where one does not own the story and one's life story is not a possessive. It's seen more from the perspective of as if you were watching a movie. And so then you understand that if you're watching the movie, the people in the movie are historically driven to continue, but you see this larger picture. But the only thing is, in seeing the larger picture, the doer, you can't do anything about it. And because you see, then you're seeing your story from a different perspective. And that perspective is only seen when the doer surrenders the ownership of the story. So you see that the survival entity in the literal world is identified with its race, with its species, with its background, with its circumstance or whatever, and it becomes defining. But before that, it had a literal structure. It was nothingness, it was mystery. It was lovers creating something. And that didn't have an identity, that it was Italian, or it was Presbyterian, or it was a Jew, or it was before the literalness. A love affair, a feeling, or whatever, an interaction, and a life then takes shape. And that life then starts to acquire an identity. And the identity is historically driven to continue, and in many cases repeat.
Yeah.
In fact, in growing up, if it doesn't repeat the family but wants to run away and have its own life, it violates something. So let's say the yearning to be free is also being hidden, resisted, because it violates the continuity. The yearning to explore this life and see this life from a different perspective other than the job orientation or the literalness of learning. So you see, in some people, it becomes a quest. When they can't find within the literal life the meaning, in other words, riches or wealth or whatever, or even safety, but there is still a yearning for something, so that love affairs aren't just part of the continuity, but they are really coming out of love affairs.
And is it possible to sustain that? I mean, you and Mary have, but is it
Well,
possible?
we're not sustaining it as much as I'm saying we're creating an atmosphere and meeting here that for the moment that we're meeting, we're coming from that place. We'll go back to a literal situation soon. So we'll go back to the need for rent money. We'll go back to the need for where relationships aren't fully cooperative or affectionate enough, or and when they start to lose that feeling, they start to kind of plot or something. So then you kind of find a very singular situation of two people who are together because of a reason, but the feeling is no longer there, and they're both planning for a different life. But the life they're planning for is without each other. So some force is making them be in a situation. So we say, we have literalized what that means But simple reason that we can't change it easily or shift it easily makes it much more complicated than. So then I say, well, seeing it from the theater, seeing it from the screenplay or from the director's perspective, you see the larger picture and you see the situation and one is in it as an aspect of a thing that is happening. That life is always happening. Even though it may be reduced to Netflix and hanging out and doing nothing is in fact reveals a remarkable world. The things that are not so much related to you now, we've gotten to know the immune system here this month here and what kind of food to eat. And so it's kind of revealing on a deeper level your everyday. The question of then even vaccine or not vaccine was not a question of when people who have lived a life who are kind of in the world, but they're not of the pursuit of the world, they're creating their life. Then they're not so persuaded or pressured by circumstance or whatever, but to do or not to do is to reduce everything to doing. And when I see from my perspective that the doer is at the service of my perception. So I kind of let the doer, okay, it's time to do something. You understand? Okay. Or the doer may say to me, look, hey, this is happening, there's pressure. So you see that there is a kind of, the perspective is when it speaks to you, when it touches you, and then you understand that it has nothing to do with survival or this or that, it has much to do with care, and it has much to do with your relationship to a larger world that you're in. And that in that moment, we have the naive philosophy that it'll speak to us. So that there's enough course written in the perception. And if the perception sees a political crisis going on around it, that's as much as its perception as a medical crisis. So let's say somehow the capacity to come from the theater, looking at the literal world, you see the underlying premises that are going on. And then you get a glimpse of why you are where you are in the situation. And a glimpse. In other words, in the relationship of conversation with each other, we're exploring the mystery. We see the thread that runs through our lives as a creative thread, and then we see the literal life that has a social security number and a birth date and a name and a mandate. And so that literal guy takes a vow. The guy with the social security number then takes a vow to think and continue the life from a social security perspective or something like that, or from a literal perspective. So then when you violate things around social security and you make a claim anyway, then it's like, okay, so that's the same as the kind of marriage where somehow the marriage is not fulfilling at this point in time for some, and you see then that the eye is looking for fulfillment. And so there's an accident waiting, a mistake taking place. But you see the mistake and the accident are really part of the theater of one's life. But it seems to have to come by accident. So when one gets a glimpse from a perspective of looking at the story from another perspective, not about doing something about it, but seeing that one's life, in fact, was a creative existence. And that the screwing up and this and that, not as a possessive, but you see how important they were creatively to your present.
Mm-hmm.
And so one gets a glimpse of the life not as a possessive, but as a life lived. I think that once one has a perspective of a life lived, it frees the energy from its karma. Because in seeing a life lived, you also free the people who were participants in it from the history themselves, and you give them a life. So you see that your mother was also coming from a human perspective, a hidden perspective, that everyone had to hide their expressions from each other. And then you can see glimpses of that in your own relationships. That somehow that many of the feelings that you may have riding through you or essentially going on have to be protected or hidden or cared for or alone with. So then at times you'll find yourself as a stranger in a strange land, in a situation where literally everyone has a role, but somehow you don't fit into the circumstance that way.
Right.
And that at one point would seem to be a flaw, but another point would accentuate the attraction to you, is that somehow essentially you're coming from a different place than the continuity.
Yes.
So somehow in your situation, you can see when there's a literal full of shitness going on around you.
Mhm.
Okay, where people need help to see something, but they have a kind of bullshit system that they're connected to that they have to maintain. So you see then plainly that all of life is missing a wholehearted, a good-hearted conversation, a hey baby conversation from the get-go. And you see that they will have to die before they come to that conversation. Because it's not a psychological conversation that one can have. The problem with it is that it has to be true. Not psychological truth, not this because it makes everybody better. You can have elements of that. But the hey baby conversation is a naive one that leaves little. I use the example with the cancer, and I was going back to the house in the Himalayas. I didn't have, and then Mary's invitation. As simple as hey baby. But would one come back into the body for a love affair? And I said, well, it have to be true. So if the invitation touches you, there's the choice. The choicelessness is no longer slavery. It's around a relationship to a truth. So when there is a situation in the circumstance, when it speaks to you deeply, it comes across as of course. But I think for us creatively, of course means of course that it speaks to you. There's an invitation in that. So I used as a medium once before, if a friend doctor said, hey, Danny, please do this, coming from that place and him, that would allow me an entree into a situation that I may not have considered myself. So somehow the invitation creatively is inherently in the story. What do you say, Urja? How are you? Since you're our example of a person who's gotten the virus, who's a natural person, who's an old geezer like me, and has gotten vaccinated and gotten the virus.
Yeah, I mean,
the virus before
I see people around me who are afraid because they read something that you might die. I don't know, for me, it was so simple. I didn't think, it felt the right thing to do with the environment I am in. So there was like no hesitation.
Yeah.
The second vaccine, I didn't want to be sick again, but I got sick again for 2 days.
Oh, you took it the vaccine twice?
Then? Yeah, it's a Moderna, yeah. I just heard that it's supposed to be the most effective.
Which one?
Moderna versus GM.
Yeah. Well, let's say, okay. And so you say it's of course.
Because I never take vaccination. I don't for flu or anything, but this time
Look,
it felt right.
you know some of the crazy love affairs that you've had. And everyone looking at you would say, what is he, shit, that old lady, crazy? But somehow, when you spoke to you about the love affair, you said, of course. And you explained it just like you explained the vaccine. I was walking down the street, he touched my arm, I looked at his eyes, and so you're kind of using the kind of logic of falling for someone. And then I say, yeah, but the guy is broke, he doesn't have any money, what are you doing? Are you crazy? He's got 4 wives. And you say, okay, somehow you made of course out of something that everyone would be saying to you, don't do it, don't get involved. So if you look at your life, you see how many people were telling you, don't do it, don't get involved in this situation, okay. And that somehow you snuck out of the window and you were going to do something that was compelling, that spoke to you. And when it spoke to you, it spoke to you. And when it spoke to you, then you became a spokesperson for it. As if it was logical.
No, I was very careful in my building not to say, go do it. So I stayed out of other people's doubt. You know, they ask me questions sometimes. How did you feel? So I tell them the truth, what happened, and today's sick.
I'm saying the difference will be Brenda and Janet of taking it and not taking it. To me, they're both the same thing. You understand? And it's going back and forth. And it's finding out this information and that information. But you see that somehow it has to speak to you. So they're tricking us into a world of doing and not doing. And so now we're talking about not so much doing and not doing, but where it's coming from. Because I'm not doing. And I'm not doing either. You understand? So I'm just going about my life. I'm not doing or not doing. I won't live that I'm afraid to do and I want to do and I should do. And so when I'm looking at the information, the doer and the not doer are very small characters in the story. And no one's going out of their way, although some rich people did offer me to do, but then I didn't know I could do that with a straight face anyway, even if I wanted to do it, because it was too, I would prefer someone who needed it to take it instead, you know. So in that sense, but that characteristic is more that it's a creative process that's going down, and your relationship to the literal world is that. So I'm saying that the doer and the not doer is not, that's a trick question. When it becomes of course to you, it'll be of course to you.
Yes.
And so I say that all of us then collectively will then have these creative challenges coming our way. Yes. And it'll reflect to what extent you are in it, but not of it.
Yeah.
But if you have access to more of a hidden life within ourselves, where that's the basis of our relationship, the creative one, then they say, well, okay, how would an actor play the part? So then from the perspective of seeing your life, where you get a glimpse of your life, where the doer is surrendered to some degree, this is only something you would get if you were coming close to dying and you couldn't move too much anymore, and you got a front row seat of your own life, and no one's calling you on any longer on the phone or this or that. So you get a chance to be completely irrelevant while you're still alive. And you see almost every action done with you is talking to an old lady, yeah, poo-poo, don't worry, don't like that, whatever. So let's say you have a front row seat of your own existence.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't, but there's no you as the owner in it. You see things. Yeah. Okay. And in seeing that, you see the privilege of that is that somehow you have to die to the literalness of the story. So you see that somehow the story throughout time is hidden from you.
Mhm.
Because one is still organized around the doer as being the essential principle of continuity, and continuity being the chief reason. But then you find out from being an actor and returning into the story, the doer is not such a strong, it's more of a creative expression of living. But one is only finds out about it later, or tries to find out about it spiritually, tries to find out what Buddha thought about one's own life. And it tries to find the ability to be with their life and see their life while they're in it. So then you discover that the very thing that one is seeking in life, one is running away from.
Mhm.
And so then every time you have a perspective, you are introduced to a mystery running concurrently in your life. That's why the example of getting a cancer 60 years later that my father had when I was a kid, and then meeting the man for the first time as a human being, not as a father, that the cancer introduced me, where any stranger could have met the person, and the difference was discovery was different than knowing. What you discover, you see that there has been a parallel life being lived.
Yeah.
That one has access to, and it kind of needs to be accidental. Reading my mother's diary after she died, usually after the death, where you visit the being, not as a literal father or mother, but a person who happens to be a father or mother. As any neighbor would have known them, they would have known them as a person who happened to be a father or a mother. But you knew them as a father or a mother who happened to be a person. That the one chief duty was to maintain this delusion with you. And that somehow that was the measurement of their existence and your existence. And then you see inherently throughout time that how that organization serves a purpose of continuity, belief, devotion, all of that form. But then anything that, when that is disturbed, when the feeling is disturbed or it's lost and the continuity is demanded, then you start to see that the longing, that there may be an inherent longing for a true love that runs also through the story. Not only a biological love, not only a historical love, not only a karmic love, you see all of those other elements or aspects of it. But that somehow running through the story is a relationship with a sort of face in the crowd, with a mystery.
Mhm.
In the story is hidden an event. And when you do have access to your own story, you see that your stories were spin-offs of accidents or situations that have happened.
Mhm.
And that somehow a feeling allowed you to do something that was impossible, to interrupt the continuity, to change the picture. And when you see it, you see somehow how you got out of that circumstance in retrospect. And you see the work involved. You see what had to happen. And yet it was just like that. But you also understand that it took years to interact with the continuum. And that it's been an artwork that you're engaged in. The only thing is that you're left out of the literalness of the artwork. Not as if you're the doer, but somehow your presence. Do you understand? The presence means your presence in absence will be missed. So somehow you are, at the same time you're living the everyday, you are living within forces and it's a creative existence.
Danny,
Yeah.
is presence almost like a flavor that you miss, or
Look, Kerry
and
tricked me into a Hawaii experience a couple of weeks ago. But he tricked me into one of the first times where he literally met the family and, and, and the inquiry, where it could have been a what the hell's, what kind of shit is this, or whatever. But also for a moment, in slipping in the story of seeing the person beyond the story, where the story presents itself as the person. But then as in friendship, you meet the inner workings, and then you see the story that they're in. Then it's very much like you being able to see a movie and to see the moves that they've made and what they are, and creatively how they put it together and what they were trying to bring about. So you see that somehow that once the story happens, its continuity is written into it. So if they say, look, put 200 years in 2-hour film, that's what we're watching now, Outlander, where somehow she visits a ruin and she slips back 200 years and she's in dual lives going back and forth. And it's pretty weird, but the woman actor is pretty brilliant. So we've been kidding around with that. But I'm saying to have access to the parallel lives means that something has happened to you where you don't own the story as much. And that happens in increments. So it would be remarkably challenging if it's not based on passing away or reading a diary that you meet, where the history and the mystery are coexistent, and you see that the history hid the mystery from you. And an accident then introduces you to someone. And you see you come more from a mystery than a history. And you see, even if you grew up in a neighborhood, everyone knew something that you discovered or found out. You see the inherent mystery that ran through the story. And you see in your own life where there is relationship and structure, but still there is a yearning. And then you then run into the crisis that comes with what appears to be a duality, where it's a fault, and you see it's a fault, but then you also see the creative undercurrent to it. So you're introduced to life, not only as your own life, but your life introduces you to life. And your relationship then is to those that you see through friendship. You're introduced to their life to some degree, and then the story that they're in. And you see that inherent in every story is missing an honest conversation or a heartfelt conversation. And I don't know that one can have one, but I do see that it's not having a conversation, it's you see how deeply avoided it is. So what looks like from the observer, man, they can have a 5-minute conversation and come up with something much cooler. You understand? They say, it'll take them 50 years to get to that 5-minute conversation because it's a surrender of the self. It's an I and thou conversation. It's like me saying again, my toe started to blow up. I had to say, I'm sorry, baby, for ignoring you. Okay. That the inflamed toe again had a sorry baby conversation to it of taking it for granted.
Yeah.
So not to dumb it down completely, but to understand that sorry baby has to really be sorry baby. It can't be phony sorry, not psychological sorry baby. And that means the loss brings you close to the thou. Now, you may have elements of that in real time, but it would be remarkable then for a family to sit and have the not only perceptual experience, but then you understand that the framework of the family is no longer a given. It is a creative act of nuances and circumstance. So once it's freed from the literalness of someone overseeing your life, but having a hidden life themselves, to then being a friend, and meaning with a friend you can have a conversation on the bench about something that's really happening for you, is to have a very rare occurrence, because usually these things are discovered only literally afterwards, after the form, because the continuity is so strong. But it doesn't mean that once one has access to that understanding, that the literal world that they've come from was more of an evocative place that had hidden insights in it. It doesn't mean that one can then go back to the family and tell them what to do and push them. You know, in other words, it's not so much to do with it. It's just opened up a creative dimension of a harness where you are introduced to the mystery in your own history. And you see then that that is what historically humanity seems to have been struggling with, the mystery and the history, how to translate the mystery into the history. And so then they found out in the literal world, discipline, pressure, punishment, reward allows a continuity that the mystery doesn't have the continuity in the same way. It comes in through feelings. So the feeling creates the possibility, but the feeling smiles at you as it leaves the situation, it leaves you with the circumstance. And usually in our structure would be a sexual attraction invites you into the story, when it was actually a sensual attraction. And that comes about usually in the loss and in missing. You saw it hidden in the sexuality was a sensuality. And that at a point where there is something in the being inside the body that is also seeking a true love while it's living a life, but also seeking something that true, and it's not defined true. But what is defined is false, where they make a thing of it. And they give you rules and structure again around it when you know that there is a kind of, there's a difference between being religious and the religion. The religion seems to incorporate the religious structure, where the religious seems to be naive enough to take a chance on life. Well, how are you, Kerry?
I'm doing okay, Danny. It's good to see you.
Well, as I say, my mother coming here to pass away and then living here all that time was pretty amazing. But it was also, again, around that premise where it was more theater that we were engaged in.
Yeah.
You know, and although it had the same, the feelings running through it, it was still a theater that we were engaged in, that the friendships transcended the continuity. There was a kind of truth to it. So the stories were more revealed of what one felt as a kid, or this or that, or what was happening. And I think that through the interaction, one got to see their own life from the theater of our friendship, where you saw what was really happening in the moves. And you saw the story of a broken heart. running through the story. And a quest. And even though they seem like natural parents doing this or doing that, you saw they were on a quest also. And they, while they were kind of forced into a literal form, okay, and you then see yourself then in that situation, then having literal family, and you still carry. And so then maintaining the continuity would be the main structure for you, but you also understand how into it you would have to be. And being into it would mean somewhat shifting your personal life. But when you see that there is a personal life and a literal life of who you have to be, you see there's a moment of conflict waiting.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like a future event, but it's inherently in the situation. So if we were making a film together, we would recognize inherently in the moment is a conflict.
Mm-hmm.
But the feelings overwhelm it at the point. So you see it's waiting. If the feelings shift and make a left turn, you see an underlying conflict will manifest. I was just reading a full 2 pages in the New York Times, I think, but I don't know where I read it, but it was showing how addictive the food processing is in America. In other words, that it's not food at all. That when you start to examine it, you see it's almost made of stuff. And that it is made of stuff that makes you feel good or feel this or feel that when you eat it, and you want to eat more of it, and that there's no food in it. So it's kind of invented into what's the percentage of people who are eating it where it's not really food, it is just additives and stuff and fats and sugars and salts that are put together in this supposed thing that once you eat it, you kind of have to eat more of it. And it's like the opioids they were talking about, that once you take it, and instead of having a program and management or whatever, that somehow is built to be addictive. And so therefore, if you change it, you have to overcome it, you have to kick it, so they've created a condition of, I don't want to kick it, but they say, okay, is that almost in every form that you don't have to grow it, you don't have to do any of this stuff like that. They always, what's the most cost-effective way? And the cost-effective way, again, is to create realities that are not realities, but that you discover years later because something happens, that cancer then happens in Portland, or this happens, or the water is that. So you find in retrospect a decision that they made 20 years ago in a closed room for whatever motives they had. And so therefore you start to see from a perspective a more and more literal artificial world where you're being programmed inherently in the situation. And so then you see what you're doing with your kids or whatever, you're attempting to free them from the programming to some degree that's prevalent. And you see that basically where it's all coming from. But you do see a world around you in flux or up in the air. And you also see that how in flux we are in the situation. So it does seem then to be an American means to be a human being. It's not laid out what that is. It's laid out what it's not. So still they haven't discovered what is a full human being, but they have discovered what is not a human being. And not a human being means when there is an action that makes it break from some essential factor in itself. And I feel that that essential factor in itself is a relationship to, we'll call it true love, but it's not true as the literalness of it. If you remember it, if you long for it, if it's this or that, you understand that truth is not a possessive of safety or security or continuity. It's in your memory, where there's no motives in the memory. So when an accidental reflection takes place and shows you a kind of a truth that ran through the story, then you start to see that your creative relationship is to that. You see that the life has been a quest, a journey. And you see the journey laid out. And so you also see that there's an inherent dissatisfaction with the false at a certain time. As long as it represents somehow in your being a true thing, somehow creatively there's room for it. It's a possibility. If you take away that feeling, then you see how weird, how the hell did you do this? You understand? And I can see how you did that. You had to have a true feeling for it to happen. And then you also understand as it shifted, and you say, holy shit, man, how the hell did you wind up there? I say, it's not a winding up, it's all part of the same picture. So you could have shouted out when you first met, watch out, this is going to happen in a couple of years. Okay. It's not, it's hidden in a couple of years. It's not really a couple of years. It's hidden in the story, kind of from the get-go. I have a picture here. Who is that there? A friend?
Zero.
That's elf friend.
I don't know who Elf Friend is. Can you tell us who you are, Elf Friend? You have quite a few people on YouTube, Danny, too, that have said hi. Henry, Regina, John, Will Wright is listening.
Yeah. Okay, but that's an intriguing picture. We should know him or her.
I've never seen it. I don't know who that is.
No.
Who is Elf Friend? Who are you?
Is it Alfred? Maybe it's Alfred.
Maybe it's Alfred. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, yay.
Well, I did speak to him that Alfred's getting married.
oh.
And he's excited and truly in love, and he feels that this is the time of his life. And he spoke to Mary for about 40 minutes there about it, and they were all thrilled for him. And then I spoke to him, and he seemed to be beaming through the telephone. And he did say he was going to come on the other day, but I don't know if he knows how to work the gadget that easily. But he did seem that he's come across another phase of his life that's intriguing for him, you know, and it's also coming from a collective down phase that's happening around us, and where there's very little reason logically to be optimistic. All of a sudden, a love affair changes that whole picture. And but there were also love affairs that I've seen. I've seen a couple of films where there were recently where there was a love affair in the concentration camp, where they would meet in the nighttime. It kind of kept them going in the most vulgar situation or something. And then when they re-met again years later, 40 years later, they discovered that they had a love affair that was still going on, even though they didn't see each other. And they had different lives for those 40 years. That when they again met accidentally or they heard the name, they discovered that they've been having this love affair all this time.
Hmm.
So the love affair then was not a possessive somehow, but was waiting there.
Yeah, that's nice.
So let's say that one is managing a life. And you see that you see yourself then from the perspective of how you're managing. And that somehow one is keeping it creative. So in some way you see how the continuity of a form, how did these people live in a concentration camp and still have a love affair and meet as if they were boyfriend and girlfriend and try to bring a flower to each other or something like that, or a wave. And so it was more sensual than sexual, but let's say somehow that allowed them to, but then in memory they located each other, where you discover all along why you've been living a literal life. You've been living a dream simultaneously. And once you start to see that, you start to see the creative elements of one's own existence. But as you have access to it, it becomes sacred. And you see then the reason that you can't leave or you can't do this or you can't do that is because there's also something holy going on simultaneously, without the woo-woo, without clouding it over too much. You start to see that there is something sacred running through the life. We got a call from whom? Alfred. Such is. Let's see what that says. Alfred, can you hear? Voicemail? No.
Alfred needs to unmute himself. I can't unmute him if he wants to talk on the call.
Oh, attachment one image. Let's see.
Oh, there we go.
There he is.
There he is.
Oh, he spoke?
Yes.
I'm unmuted.
You're muted.
Unmute. I'm mute. I'm a deaf mute and dumb.
Well, that's better than losing your sense of smell. I've been exploring. We've been deeply exploring because they say many people lose their sense of smell. So we've created a lot of concoctions here, but basically for the sense of smell. But then exploring it further, you see there's a whole school, and there's a group of people who are born without smell, who kind of feel that it's just like being blind or being deaf. And now some people who have lost the sense of smell feel that they've lost almost 20% of their life, or their feeling for life. And so we've been kind of exploring a little bit this sense of taking it for granted. There was a wonderful article about the sense of smell. And I remember years ago, we experimented with many scents. And even now I do use the, what is that again? That neti stick. There's a neti stick by the Himalaya Institute that you just use to check to see that your smell is there. But then as I explored it, it again opened up a whole other dimension of smell being in the story. So I wanted to call you, Alfred, about that. And maybe you can call Spiro and let him know that also.
I will.
Okay. That there was an article in the New York Times about 2 or 3 weeks ago in the magazine that had a story about smell, but from a woman who didn't realize that she was born without the sense of smell until later in age. And so she thought that everyone was doing miracles with their smell and what they were able to achieve with it, with food and things like that. Because the one thing that they say is that without the smell, you usually stop eating. There's not, without knowing it so much, there's not so much an attraction. It's like eating cardboard, one fellow said. Almost all the food is like cardboard tasting. That there's nothing, no satisfaction in it. There's not even looking forward to eating or anything like that. And so there is a, what they would call suicide, but kind of letting go of the meaning, like you lost the meaning in life, we'll say, and you kind of have to be educated back into life without that sense. So it's, let's say that you discover a parallel life that's being lived all along in the loss of it. But the fundamental loss is trying to retain it. But I think that something happens in the missing that allows you access to a whole dimension in yourself, that you've then taken up something that you will remember, that is in your being now in some way. Now, some of it is Buber's I and thou recognition, when one takes an action to actualize a feeling. And that the thing that is created is more evocative. The motive for it is evocative more than literal. Meaning that there's an I and thou in it. There's a, hey baby, do you want to do this? Hey baby, do you really want to do this? Sure, let's give it a shot. And you see how deep that is. When I liken that to when I had the cancer years ago and I was going back to the house in India, I didn't have such a fight. Given this exploration, the struggle with a literal death is not as demanding. But I felt it was the ending of the Santa Fe story, the cancer. And then Mary's invitation, hey baby, we'll call it, would one come back into the body, into the form for a love affair. And you know, I say from our perspective of inquiry, would kind of have to touch you in a way, not just be psychological, but somehow it left you choiceless. Not in a bad way of choicelessness, but that it touched you deeply, where you saw that choice was not the logical manifestation of the feeling, it was response. So it's that one then assumes the identity of the invitation. So you'd like the creative act to be coming from this similar perception. And it's as simple as, hey baby, you want to try this thing? But that's inherently a remarkable invitation. Because at the same time that we've had this journey through life, it's been a quest, it's usually been a quest around relationship. And then that runs through it. But then you also see in retrospect that there was a yearning for a true love, and it's not spelled out. But that somehow the next phase of our life has to be true. And it's not that it's psychological, poor thing, his mother kicked his ass, or he did that, or the poor guy and he's broke, but that you're coming into it from, and I'm not talking about psychologically cool place, I'm talking about creatively, you know, that something starts from the action. And that you then have your past as mystery, not so much history. It's not a past of repetition any longer. It's a past that frees the story for this new experimentation, this new experience. So I see Alfred, this New Jerseyite, as a saint from New Jersey. And I say, good luck, but there's, I think, you're going into this with a sound mind, I presume. And do you feel you have sound mind, Alfred?
No matter, never mind.
Who played this cruel joke on Bloke After Bloke? Okay, so let's start from before Hinduism, let's start from Kerouac.
Well, I'm involved with a Hindu.
I understand, but unfortunately the Hindus are taking over their country in a way that kind of kicks us out to where we then purify the Hinduism.
And they own their children.
Nah.
Yeah, they do. But the Italians and Hindus, we talk like this, with our hands.
Okay, let me see all the moves that one could make as an Italian. Now, all these moves I could make as a Hindu. Let's say I'm exposed to both, but somehow, I remember as a little kid, then I went to my friend's father's funeral, Mr. Lombardi, and I didn't know and I made the sign of the cross there. And they took me in the bathroom, a couple of older kids, and started to smack the shit out of me. Okay, so, and let's say that I then met some people in Rishikesh there that they were a beggar class of people. So it was natural for them to kind of break their kids' legs or adjust their bodies so they would be good beggars, just as if they were sending them to college or something. And you found yourself in a dumb situation talking to the literalness of Hinduism, not the evocativeness. So when I'm talking about sensuality being the basis of the expression spiritually, that the sensuality that may express itself sexually, but it's coming from a different place. We're talking about Krishna and the gopis. We're talking about, in fact, I have a painting from 1927 of my father that he said he knew Tagore. And he did this Krishna playing the flute and all the animals and lovers all swooning into it. And the premise of it, he says, was Tagore's poem was that when everyone heard the sound, they would all melt into one being. So if that's the basis of it, then it does seem to me, but the literalness of Hinduism, Om Sang Sadar. Let's say, okay, and are you doing Catholic also?
Hell no.
Well, I think that we're kind of religious beings. Like the connection between all of us here is religious. The religion is something else. I feel the religious, so there's a religious being will have a conflict with the religion at a certain point.
I've been born again savage.
Pre-religion.
Yeah. Or okay. The old religion, old time religion.
Old time religion is what? It's second nature to you now. Like breathing out and breathing in.
Yeah, that's it. You got it.
So I say that when one comes back into the story from having died and then assumes the identity, that's why I say that one meets one's father. I meet my father in a cancer that he had 60 years ago, and I see the human being that I never met, literally. So then when you're talking about Hinduism as a family, you're not talking about the literal family of continuity. You're talking about the evocative family that's there in memory. And then you understand the hidden life of each person who was in the story of continuity. So you then explore that the originators of the religion were not in continuity, they were in perception. So that those who saw had a different relationship with the literal life. But then you understand that the ism literalized it into a continuity. But that Buddha had a conversation with himself. And anyone who stopped what they were doing and sat with him on the roadside was then free to explore something, but they had to interrupt what they were doing. And take it and have the conversation be important enough to interrupt it for a moment. So that momentary interruption then brought some insight into the literal story they're in. But when one has devoted themselves in retrospect, as you seem to have, to the exploration of that thing, that hidden thing, through frogs' asses and watermelon seeds or whatever the fuck you want to do. Let's say you went through every frog's ass and whatever balls you can find to have a taste, hey baby, of the moment. I say I admire that journey. But to me, there is an inner yearning, not so much for a literalness of accomplishment, but it kind of expresses that you made a life creatively around this journey. So when I say, what's the philosophy again? I would say to liberate the energy from the literal story. We called it, there's a book we wrote years ago by a doctor called Darshan Yoga, where it's revealed. And I would say that the historical impact of religion was because there was a religious feeling that ran through the story. So what would you call yourself again now? Dharma Bum. How about Dharma Bum?
Lucky.
Very lucky. What do you think? It's some of us are then born free. That we come from such a convoluted history or background that there's an essential freedom in it, in perspective. So, congratulations again. I hope that my respect for Hinduism, not the literalness, but not the ism so much, but somehow, but actually for me, it was the collapse of the belief when I went there. As I mentioned before, and I was in the Himalayas and really into the mantras, and it was a kind of tough exercise style. In fact, I probably got bad dysentery from the Ganges, you know. But at the same time, I woke up one day knowing it was full of shit for me. And then as I then went to the guru and the request was for money, and then decided to literalize again and again. But then I found out in retrospect, a kind of despair came that I was then trapped in India. And as I then traveled around, everything seemed full of shit to me. And they were mostly guys from the Bronx or Brooklyn doing swamis or at the time. So it was becoming, again, a cheesy scene that I had left or something, but I had no place to go back to literally any longer. I was there. But I then found in retrospect that was a kind of despair was necessary for me then to run into Dr. Kaushik in India. There, who was, someone mentioned his name, and I really went through a lot of shit to get there. And as I mentioned, he was having an argument with his wife on the front of the house. And he was in a kind of despair himself between being a doctor there, a homeopathic doctor, a husband, and this and that. And at the same time, quite a few hippies were coming in to talk with him, and he was discovering another life. And so I think that that despair of some sort, not that I would suggest it, but a despair, not as a possessive, but as in fact opens up a doorway of perception, where you see that one cannot be satisfied with the false. And so you see then at certain points in your life, you become aware of the journey for a true thing, a true experience. And it's not laid out what truth is, but what it's not is. So I feel that, what is this representation here, Alfred?
It's dog.
Oh, just a dog. Okay.
No, well, no, dog, God spelled backwards is my guess.
The
Well,
bio.
Am I close?
I get the food of the dogs. I feed all my gods.
Okay. Is anyone else on here? Did this make any sense, Alfred, or is this
Oh,
is
hey,
this
Dan,
more Mr. Gosh?
After 10 years, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, we're using the medium as a freedom from the literal story, and we're then giving everyone involved in what they're doing a kind of perceptive insight of creating an artwork. where the artwork has history as mystery more. In other words, once the parents are released from the literal possessiveness of the story, then you meet them before you're born to some degree as people. And you saw the dialogue that went on before your literal presence, that you all existed more in hope and schemes and dreams and fears. And just like hormones entering into the literal story, you also see those hopes and schemes and dreams that entered into the story.
In your world, hey baby, I'm into it.
So then there's an event, like I say, where you meet your father in the cancer, and you see he wasn't your father, but a person who was doing his version of father. Like any neighbor knew, like everybody knew, you discover that he was a person doing father, who happened to be a father. You thought he was a father who happened to be a person. So then you saw then that the rules that he may give you about living were not the rules that he would give to some stranger that he would meet or some lover he may have. That he would allow them somehow a creative freedom that he couldn't allow you. But discovery then shifts the plane, not as freedom as licensed behavior or reaction, but freedom that's just instantly there. Once you see that your father happened to be a person who happened to be a father, and you meet then another dimension of your own life that was coexisting with you. And you see the Dharma was coexisting with the karma. Why you were literally this person with a literal background, literal history, and a literal destiny. You see there was an evocative, coincidental life that you would stumble upon or yearn for every now and then, or try to reach artificially, but you could only visit. Unless you became, and then if you became so much that you wanted to make your life around visiting that coincidental space, you saw how they then captured you in addictions and structures to bring you back to the straight and narrow. So they made this attempt to explore true love, a true life. They made it into punishment or a screw up or a fuck up. And in fact, we were screw ups. In fact, screw ups were probably a necessary state in order to be able to be with the creative state where you then detected the inhumanity of the circumstance that they were having you sign up for. And so there was something in you that protected the freedom without even knowing it. So there are moments when it's revealed. And so therefore, when you do then meet the religion after coming back from dying, you meet Buddha, not Buddhism so much. You see how Buddhism then came about. But then it's you driving past the Buddha and you see him there and you park and you have a conversation. And you share a moment with Buddha. And in sharing a moment with Buddha, you see the Buddha experience. That the deeper you are about it, you see then it doesn't come with instructions that way. It becomes second nature to you now. You want the experience of Buddha as being second nature to you now, where your eyes sees it from that place. So that when you go into the situation, it's you going into the situation. That's why the dopey conversation of, hey baby, do you want to try this thing? Is not exactly dopey. But it does force somehow it to be true. And true is not laid out like a law, but it is a more poetically true. Because the hey baby conversation interrupts the history and then starts from the mystery from the get-go. Not that one is reaching it, but that one starts out from the energy. Lots of luck, as they say in that. but I admire that possibility. Is that okay, Alfred?
Thanks, Danny.
That was pretty nice, man. I'd like to hear that back myself because it sounded pretty much that you were kind of representing our situation or our desires or what we'd like to be in, you know. So be cool with that. Is everyone else okay? Do you see yourself in something like that, Derek? Without mimicking it, but what do you see?
Something like what? Would I be?
Well, like those kind of cool glasses and that hairdo. Says to me that you're kind of available for a true love.
Yeah.
That's the kind of glasses you would want.
But aren't we all kind of always available for a true love?
Okay. So let's say always that there is always, but let's say we make it second nature to them, just like, you know, when it's cold outside, you know what clothes to put on. So let's say that there are inherent elements in your own being that you've taken for granted, but it's second nature to you now, where you can adjust yourself for temperature and time and this and that and breathing if something's in the air. So let's say that it's a remarkable instrument and it's normalized. And then they premise an immune system, and you see an immune system that is doing this juggling act of living and dying. So then you have a perception, not only in the atmosphere and the situation, but there's literal time and there's evocative time. And you see the difference between literal time, you have to get to work at a certain time, you have to do this, you have to pay the rent on time. There's a literalness to the character, but then you also see how much of life is being lived privately in evocative time.
It's like all of it, almost all of
So,
it. Like almost all of it. No.
So then you also then come to a situation when you are creatively meeting that somehow what you're creatively meeting about is resembling that you're hoping to make a movie that is true in some way, that reflects something deeply true. But then you also see that you've transferred to some degree that is an element that is happening in your life. And so part of the challenges that you'll have is that you cannot falsify it anymore. That somehow it has to have real depth to it or truth in it. And that's not laid out. But somehow you see that you then have you've developed a second nature where you measure selling, what it's selling out would be. It's not laid out what selling out would be, but somehow releasing the creative energy to survive is the balance you see in the world around you. That the survival premise is so strong that one is constantly balancing the poetic dimension of their life. So we then meet an Alfred who's now saying, yippee, yippee, yay, yippee. And a couple of weeks ago, he was saying, I don't know what the hell is going on, the QAnon, the Trump, and other jumpers. I don't know what they talk about up there in town. But all of a sudden, he's saying, yippee, yahoo, aho, boy, oh boy, man, oh man. Or there's a song for you, Alfred, and it's called Sadhu Baye. Oh, no, that was, who sang that song? I think it was not Guru Nanak, but one of the poets there. And he said, Sadhu, why are you starving yourself to death and wearing those weird outfits, man? You think God wants you to do all that stuff? So I think it's called Sadhu Brother, and it's Kabir, a song from Kabir. I remember we used to sing a couple of Kabir songs in India. And there was another one of a Om Sansara Vriksha Marude. That was a whole series of mantra about Shiva being up in the tree and asking him to come down. And then there were songs that came out of Mirabai, who loved Krishna so much that she would manifest Krishna into the body, into form, reluctantly. And when her husband saw her bring Krishna into form by her longing, by her yearning, he surrendered the hold of the marriage on her, karmically. And that she was the first to say that missing creates manifestations. And that a deep missing as part of one's prayer or feeling or being second nature to you now that you're yearning creates manifestations. And so there's a whole symbology around missing, that even the idea that you may miss someone or a name may come up and you get a phone call or you see them after 20 years or accidentally or whatever, but that there's parallel lives being lived all along, that it's not, that the moment that you see something, it's not the past or the present or the future any longer, but you see parallel time. And then you may meet a moment where you meet your parents as people. And it changes the actual plane of one's life, where dying and living are seen to be, you have such a perception that with my father in the moment where he's not a father anymore, but you see the thread of life that ran through it, where you see that dying and living are coexisting and in fact essential to each other. And the idea of suppressing dying in order to enthusiastic living has created an element of fear as part of the continuity of fear is the fear then, and it's then called death. And it's not death of you, but the death of the story that you're in. But perceptively, whenever you revisit the life from a different scene where it's not around the continuity, you see your life has been more maybe 5 or 10 movies that you've been in, not so literal, but the thread of you runs through it. And you see the thread of you as a journey. So to see the journey, not to conjecture it, not to presume it, but to see the journey is to then see how much of in your life the influence of the journey has had. And you see it's the journey that introduced you. And it's the journey that shifts the scene. And the journey is related to something that's essentially true, that is not so much literalized as structurally true, that the mystery is not following the history. But when you see that you have a life in relationship to the mystery, then the thread that runs through the story, you become aware of. And when you become aware of that thread, the survival aspect of it is only an aspect of it, not the dominating factor that's there in the social fabric. So when folks meet in that and then return to their literal life afterward, they take a bit of that into the structure. Now, the weirdness is that the attraction to them is that freedom, and the pissed offness with them is also because they have an essential freedom. So it's essential freedom means that somehow a perception freed you from the literal story, but you're in a literal story. Okay, that has a name and a date and a time okay. And yet you see that you're evocatively in a literal story, and the attraction to you was that there was a true feeling for you, but that's schmutzing up the literal story. Because then they can't be real creeps. because they still have an affection or a love there. And it looks like it's following rules, but as a matter of fact, it's not so much restricted to the people. The people are fueling another dimension of life, which is memory. And then the premise of memory being also incarnative. That somehow as the memory comes to you, not as a possessive of your own, but it actually incarnates. You see a thou in the story that's hidden in plain sight. And the thou resembles more of a movie. That it was a collective, everyone somehow in the movie was on board with their role. But there may be moments when creatively it's shared that way. And that's the premise of having a creative act together, or a premise of making film together, that everyone remains who they are, but somehow everyone remembers the experience in their own way and takes it into the literal story that they're in. As one sees it, there's a creative thread that runs through the story. You then see a God energy, but it's no longer possessive of God with a name and a structure. It may assume an identity just like in a movie for a moment. But if it literalizes and becomes a possessive, then somehow you understand, if you have a relationship with the truth, the true energy, it'll always be kind of lame at those who attach themselves into rules and regulations about the mystery. You can apply the rules and regulations basically to the literal life, but when you try to lay it on the mystery, it laughs at you. Because somehow, in order to be with the mystery, you have to be on a similar frequency with it. And that means that one starts to cease to possess the story. And one sees one's life as a creative act. So to some extent, and an aspect of a creation. So to some extent, I think that the occurrences or the crises that happen around the virus, whatever, are revelatory. And they reveal that there is no literal this or that. There is no literal, they've literalized countries and they've literalized situations, spaces. But it is, in fact, this journey that we're on. And coming from a place is an aspect of it. It's one of the flavors that we've had. But whether is there an America that you'll kill and shoot for and die for? And I said, you know, I was in that situation then as a youngster, and I ran into what was a schmuck in myself. But then in retrospect and accessing, I ran into the human in myself, and I saw the weird scene that I was in. So then when you have a feeling for the religion, and then you run into these guys who are in charge of the religion, you get a weird feeling about what the hell am I in here? So you understand that we come more from whatever background there's an experience that we've had, that somehow we're in it, but we're not of it. We're in it. This Meshuggah love affair has allowed us to cross boundaries and experiences, and to mix these herbs and mix this situation where you see we've created our thing. And our thing is a religious experience. And the premise of that is that people, to the degree as possible, are coming in from a hey baby, meaning that they're not dominated by a karma. They are entering into a dharmic experience where it's not a possessive, but it's a shared experience. Then time has shifted in that. I think it moves, that it's not only linear time, but it's evocative time. And much of the time is in memories and in absence and situations like that. But where one gets to experience their life not as they're possessive, but they get to see dimensions of it that were hidden in plain sight, that the neighborhood may have known, but you discover. Okay, is that it for the? Thanks very much for meeting here today. Thanks for putting this on, Kai.
Yes.
Thank you, Danny. Beautiful.
Yeah, I don't know if others have been on there. Do you see others there?
Well, on YouTube, let's see, we have, who else came other than the people I mentioned? It looks like Marilyn. Is that you, Marilyn? M.M. Perez?
Yeah, Marilyn Perez.
Yeah. And who else? Carolyn Wallace?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, that's good to see her. I guess, can I
Karen.
see the picture?
Hi. So yeah,
So-
there are people watching on YouTube. Does anybody have a question for Danny on, you can chat it into the YouTube thing. And it's Derek's birthday today. Happy birthday, Derek.
Derek.
Oh yeah, that's right. I had.
Thursday.
Hey, Derek, thank you so much.
So you must be 75 years old now.
Getting there.
How old are you?
46 today.
Wow.
And it was Janet's birthday yesterday.
Oh,
And
Janet.
it seems okay. It seems okay.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah.
And,
it's a
Carolyn
talking
said-
about, huh?
Sorry.
And we're kind of also throwing up in the air well, Derek got the vaccination too, so you can see he and Ursula are side by side there, vaccinated one.
I didn't get the vaccine.
Which one did you get there, Derek?
I didn't get a vaccine.
I mean, no, Carrie, which vaccination did you get, Carrie?
Oh yeah, I just got my second one today, actually this morning.
What's the company?
Moderna.
Moderna. And
Yeah,
that's what you got, Ursula.
yes.
So maybe you should go to San Francisco and hang out for a while.
Together.
That's mine.
Yeah, together, or maybe go to Boulder, Colorado. I was reading about someone in Boulder, Colorado yesterday.
I'd like to go to Boulder again.
Yeah, remember Boulder, Colorado?
Yeah.
She can just look out the window and see all of Boulder in front of her. Is it crowded?
Boulder?
Yeah.
Only on the weekend. At the end of the week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. The beginning of the week is very quiet.
Yeah, I was just reading something where someone here moved to Boulder, Colorado recently. So it should be interesting there, no? You're not going out, are you, too much?
I go shopping, I get on my bike and
Yeah.
see it from my bike. Cruising.
And there was a young woman who works with Mary in the shop there. And she thought that she may have a virus, but she just got tested and she's okay. So it just seems at the same time that it's happening, it's still up in the air.
Yes.
And we've had a few people who are, well, you guys are representing going out there. The question of doing or not doing comes to when it speaks to you, and doing that it's an illusion that the doer owns the story. You see, but you see the forces that try to shame you or do this or do that, and all of them are relevant to a collective. But that's what a collective does also, to get you to think a certain way. Still, when we go into it, we're coming from a space ourselves. Whatever we do, we're doing. So then I'll have to take measures in life as to, okay, I'll try this or I'll do that. But I'm related more to a creative act. So the doing and the not doing are pretty close here. And it's around, coming to a moment in yourself where it says, of course. It's not so much about you or whatever, but it speaks to you creatively. So Urja still has the capacity, and I think it's because there's a French background where she could say, oh, I didn't take the vaccine. I was just sitting here and they gave it to me. Or I was just sitting here and the virus came. And then I was just sitting here and I got the second shot and I wasn't even thinking about it.
I got a call.
So most of us would like that, though. We would like, so she's able to do that with a straight face. I don't know how I got it. I was just sitting here.
I didn't say.
I got the virus, I got the shot, I got the second shot, I got the this and that just by watching Netflix. Okay. So I say, some of us may have a similar situation where it's just like watching a Netflix show. But there is a weird show, if you want to see it, that Outlander. It's a very weird show, but there was another show that we saw about
And
no, it's a sin.
I can't
Where
get it.
these gay kids came out in 1981 and the virus was out there, the AIDS virus. And then it reminded us of what we also lived through here with quite a few people that we knew had the AIDS virus, and Brenda was caring for quite a few and saw them off to dying and stuff like that. And how it was normally living within our circumstance. And that we had some situations where some of our kids that we've known were born in that. It started life in that. And yet it was normalized all their life. They had the COVID virus circumstance. That was normal for us in relationship as a family of friends. And yet each person was still free to live their life. But we understood that those threads ran through everything. What was happening in the world was also happening to us. And for the last 40 some odd years, I've been living in communities of one sort or another in different parts of the world and different situations, these sometimes simultaneously. And so that, but somehow with all the maybe thousands of folks that we've known, they've all created a life out of the energy to some degree. And they're in it, but not of it. So almost everyone that we've met after meeting then has a sort of creative life that they're in, which is their expression. And so I do feel that there are wake-up moments that allow you to see the journey. But there is always a need, there's always a construct out there of literalization of the kind. But you see that the love affairs and the losses, in fact, of an accident and situations and naivete have been important around an innocence. So that whenever one has made a love relationship, situation, or expression, in retrospect, you could say now that you've always been a fool for love. Now, being a schmuck for love is another dimension of fool for love. But I do feel that schmuck means one who is in it but not of it. A good-hearted schmuck.
Hello.
Meaning the original schmuck must have been the Samaritans who would give you a shirt off their back. Or give you their meal rather than eat it themselves, instinctively or naturally.
No, go ahead, tell me.
And the diets of some who came from those periods of time came from being enslaved and not eating what these people who treated them in a beastly way would eat. So they saw the food that they ate, that the masters ate, was beast food. So let's say you transport yourself back a few thousand years and you're seeing yourself in a situation. And how did you keep your humanity together as friends? You saw friendship was the medium. And so you see the true history has been this kind of undercurrent friendship throughout time. And so you see the agreements that they had to keep their humanity together in inhuman situations become rules and regulations in time. But I think before they were rules and regulations, they were advice on how to keep yourself together in a tough world. How to keep your humanity throughout the story. Okay, shall we? I'll see you maybe tomorrow night for some folks. Is that okay?
Thanks, Danny.
Okay, everyone, then I'll see you.
Thank you, Danny.
Okay, really nice to see you guys, and take care. Thanks again, Nakai.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody watching. If you want to leave a comment for Danny, you can, and we'll be probably back next week.
Okay, we'll see you then.
Thanks, Danny.
Bye-bye.
Bye.